Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, welcome to your weekend. Welcome to what felt like an insanely long week's ending, and we're gonna be able to actually relax, reboot, rejuvenate, and get after it, right? So this week's flip, this week coming up, very, very all important, right? You're gonna be getting a lot of different stuff over email this weekend, okay? So it's important to be looking out for it. You're going to be getting an email about the project specifically, laying out everything, showing you how to do everything, giving you a good idea, and those presentations are going to start the second class period that you have me next week. So for G period, I believe that's Wednesday, and for B and C period, I believe that's Thursday, all right? So your presentations are meant to just show that you're an expert in your particular artwork, right? They're not that hard, they're not that insane, but it's important to do a lot of really good research. Do not limit yourself to anything. Try Khan Academy. Try, using Wikipedia to create an intellectual base is great. History.com is fine. There's lots and lots of different resources, though, okay? So please, just get out there, try to find some good stuff, and if you're concerned that you don't know enough, come see me anytime at S period, Monday or Tuesday, or in the morning, or after school, and I will totally go over your content. I'll ask you questions about the artwork, and we'll see kind of where you sit and stand, okay? Now, we left off in class, though, talking about none other than Dante Alighieri, right? Talking about the Italian vernacular writer known as Dante, right? So he is going to do his major works in the early 1300s. He's an epic poet, the poet that's going to bring back epic literature in the form of a long-form poet at the end of the Middle Ages, and his most famous work, of course, is the Divine Comedy, right? Now, remember, we talked about this in class. The Divine Comedy, okay, is broken into 3 different sections, and it is a vernacular text, okay? Vernacular, of course, meaning it was written in Italian, okay? If I were to write a book in English, that is written in a vernacular language. If I wrote a book in French, it's still vernacular because people speak French, all right? So, however, if I wrote a book in Latin, that is no longer vernacular, okay? Latin is a dead language. No one speaks Latin unless you live inside the Vatican, okay? So that would be a non-vernacular text, okay? If I wrote a book in Aramaic, which would be very impressive, but that's the language that Christ spoke, so that's a non-vernacular language. Dante's work is going to be huge because it's a book that actually is written in the intention of other people, common people, nobles, or anyone educated enough to read can get out there and read it, right? So, and big thing to remember, the Divine Comedy is broken up into 3 sections. The Inferno, the Purgatory, all right? It's the Mountain of Purgatory, also known as Purgatorio, and the Paradiso section, or Heaven, right? And as we know, he meets Virgil, he travels his way through, the most important nugget that you have to understand is most people are obsessed with the first third, the Inferno portion, right, which we talked about in class, where you have your layers and layers and layers of hell that he's traveling through. These ones up here are for certain sins, including lust, gluttony, what else? Fraud, I believe, and then several other different layers. There's a lot of great videos out there on YouTube that'll explain all of them very, very in depth, which I do not have time to do. This right here is the wall of Dis that separates violent offenders in hell from non-violent offenders in hell. And it's a very interesting idea also because here is limbo. This is where the journey starts. This is where apparently Caesar is before they cross a river going into hell proper, right? So it's a lot of very interesting stuff, and it's an amazing story that you'll probably end up going over and talking about really in depth in one of your English classes as you go through Chappelle, right? And then, of course, the main region, though, of hell that everybody likes to talk about is when he gets down to the very, very bottom down here where Satan is located, and that is actually where Satan is frozen in a block of ice all the way up to his chest. He has 3 sets of bat wings, and he actually is down there because he is the ultimate betrayer, right? The betrayer, the backstabber, the worst of the worst, right? And in that block of ice all around him are other betrayers and bad people that have disregarded or backstabbed someone frozen in the block of ice around him. Every time he tries to flap his wings to get out, the ice just freezes harder and hurts him, right? So, and then of course his punishment for all of eternity is he has 3 faces, 1 here, 2 here, and he actually is just reaching out and eating these people, right? He's just eating and consuming them while he cries, and that is his punishment, right? And those 3 people are Judas, of course, the betrayer of Christ, and Brutus and Cassius, the betrayer of Caesar, right? So the guys who stabbed him. So interesting idea about Satan in this text. Very interesting idea also because Dante proposes the concept of Satan being the guy that is punished, not the John Milton idea from Paradise Lost. He is a writer from the 1800s that is going to, actually, is it the 1800s? I believe it is. Paradise Lost by John Milton. Was written in, oh no, it's actually much earlier than that. First version was in 1667, all right? So in 1667, John Milton writes Paradise Lost, and then he describes Satan as this kind of figure that rules over hell and a kind of a misfit in and of a sense, and also kind of this individual that is the icon, the beacon, the leader of evil, which is not the Dante version, right? So, interestingly enough, though, I love talking about the Inferno. I love talking about Purgatory is really interesting as well because the mountain of Purgatory has 7 different layers, which represent 7 different deadly sins, and you have to atone for those sins in a certain way. For example, the ones who are envious have their mouth and eyes sewn shut, and they have to be there for a certain amount of time before they escalate into paradise, which is heaven, which actually, oddly enough, inside of Dante's book, The Divine Comedy, heaven is the layer of planets, which is really, really neat. So, really quick, though, Petrarch, another very influential writer, who's going to do most of his groundbreaking work around the year of 1341, right? Petrarch is considered one of the founders of the Renaissance, right? He comes after Dante, and we believe actually that his father and Dante were very close friends, right? So Dante would have known Petrarch, right? And Petrarch, also a Florentine himself, is considered the father of the humanist school, right? He is very, very important. He is going to be the guy that translates Roman text from Latin and Arabic back into vernacular languages. He is going to study Roman manuscripts, and he's going to reinvent the study of the classics, right? Jot that down. He reinvents the study of the classics, right? He reinvents the idea of studying non-theologic subjects, right? If you want to be a theologian and go to a university and become a priest, he's like, yo, that's fine, okay? But Petrarch introduces the idea of studying subjects that do not relate to the Bible, introducing these concepts of humanism, right? He pioneers the ideas of studying mathematics, law, medicine, other different subjects that affect human beings in this realm, which is why they're called the humanities and or the liberal arts, right? So, which is what I majored in college, a liberal art, right? Liberal arts is somebody who majors in an idea that is like a humanity or something directly related to human beings, right? Because I majored in history, so of course I was a liberal arts major, right? So he's going to translate Roman texts, including historians like Titus Livy. He's going to translate texts, including the fantastic Roman orator Octavian, right? So he's going to even do a lot of very humanistic things. One very famous moment he does is when he climbs to the top of Mount Venus, right? Like he climbs to the top of this mountain that people claim no one has climbed to the top to since the Roman era. And why does he do it? Not to become closer to God, but jot this down. He says he does it to see the view. He does it to get up there and see what it looks like up there. Why? What is it? Is it beautiful there? Let's go find out. In an essence, that's humanism, right? Petrarch is very important, but he's also very easy to forget. So do me a favor. Underline him, star him, underline him, circle him, star him. It's very, very important because your section for your test for the Renaissance era is going to be a short matching section that only includes about 8, 9, or 10 people, okay? So you don't want to lose points on a very easy section, okay? So Petrarch, very, very important figure, okay? Petrarch and Dante represent, and you can do me the favor by like kind of like writing this off in the region on the sub side right over here. Petrarch and Dante represent writers that can kind of go in or out of the Middle Ages into the Renaissance, right? They're a part of that last straw of the Middle Ages, clinging on to the ideals of the intellectuals, right? And you can see this in the earliest copies of their works, right? So these two images right here are actually some of the earliest made versions of the Divine Comedy, right? This right here is that moment I talked about in class when Dante's walking through the woods and he hears a voice saying, Dante, right? And he's like, it's Beatrice, I gotta go save her. And he goes to the base of this mountain, and coming running down the mountain is a lion, a wolf, and a leopard, right? And they tell him to back off. And then, of course, Virgil appears and Dante freaks out, and then they begin their journey together through hell, purgatory, and heaven, right? So Dante's original text, the original books that were made of the Divine Comedy, were made very, very early, around 1390. All right, so as you can tell by looking at them, they are handwritten, they are hand decorated, and making copies of these takes forever. All right, so looking at this right here, right? Look, this had to be drawn and painted into the book directly by somebody who knew how to do it, right? Also, all the words you can see are directly applied to the page. Everything is written by hand, okay? So that takes forever, and it makes these books very expensive. Not only just today, but also in 1390 when this was made, you had to have a wild amount of money to be able to afford having this text in your home, right? So very expensive, very big and expensive thing. But that's all going to change around 1440 when this bad boy was invented, right? The printing press, okay? This thing right here is the Gutenberg printing press, right? The Gutenberg printing press is go back. Is Oh, see, now I'm all messed up. All right, so there we go. There we go. All right, so the Gutenberg printing press is phenomenally important, okay? Johannes Gutenberg, a German metal and goldsmith, creates the very first printing press actually ever created in Western civilizations. Now, some of y'all are paying attention right now, and you're going to hear me, and it's going to make complete sense, and it's going to help you out. Some of y'all might have me muted or something, which to you I laugh and scoff at, and you wonder why you don't get good test grades. So the big thing about it, the printing press, the first one, was not invented in Europe. The very first printing press was actually invented in Asia, all right? So remember when we talked about the monsoon marketplace, the Eastern Golden Age, right? When the Europeans were having their Middle Ages, the rest of the world was doing actually quite well. So in that time period, the Asiatic communities in China and Korea invented the very first printing presses, right? But their printing presses were made out of wood, and the types were made out of wood, right? And the problem with those things is that they didn't stand up the test of time, right? They'd soak up ink, they'd degrade, they'd fall apart. So Gutenberg takes the idea of their printing press and he makes the types out of metal. All right, so what a type is, a T-Y-P-E, a type is an individual metal letter, right? So it would be like making this J into a one squared J, much like a Scrabble tile, right, out of metal, right? Which you would then line up next to the O, and then you'd line up next to the H tile, the type, and then the A, and then the N, and then the N, and then you'd line all those things up underneath the printing press right here on this level of the printing press. You would then take these goofy little ink dabbers that look like maracas, all right, and you would get them damped up, and you go ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, and then you would just go whack out, and you would actually press the paper down into the types and actually make a typed like piece of paper, right? You would actually be able to now make a page in a book much easier, much more efficiently, and much faster, right? So these printed books are going to be cheaper, and they're going to begin to expose classes to literature, right? And so literacy rates are going to increase. Not only is it going to do that, but it's going to serve as pieces of propaganda. It's going to move information faster, right? So the works of Petrarch and Dante did not spread nearly as fast as later Renaissance writers, okay? And we're going to talk about two of those in about 2 seconds. Very important to know. Also, fun fact, They're called uppercase for capital letters and lowercase for lowercase letters or smaller letters. They're actually called that because in print shops, the larger letters were used less frequently because you would only have to start sentences or proper nouns with them, right? So they were kept in a case that was kept above the printer's heads, right? So they would have to reach for them, but the lowercase letters were kept in the lower cases for easy reaching because they needed them all the time, right? So you had your uppercase letters, your capital letters, and your lowercase letters. So take that. All right, so now look. Very important device, though. Very first book ever printed on that bad boy was the Bible, all right? And that Bible is known as the Gutenberg Bible, all right? So very important that we know that. Why is everything so messed up? All right, so we go like this, and we go like this. There we go. Now, speaking of those writers, those two later writers, this guy's going to be one of the biggest ones, all right? So his name is Baldassarre Castiglione, right? So Baldassarre Castiglione is the guy every year that no one remembers. Look how sad that makes him, right? Look how sad that makes him. He's very upset that you never remember who he is. So it's important to highlight star and understand who this guy is. He's important, all right? So now he is a post-printing press writer, or around when the printing press was invented. So his works are going to be printed, very widely accepted, very quickly moved all over Europe, right? And his main work is known as the courtier. All right, so the courtier. Now look, let's talk about what that word means for a second, okay? The courtier, or a courtier, is a word used to describe an assistant or an advisor to a king, okay? So during the Middle Ages, kings would often have these things known as royal courts, right? Or a court. They would live court life, right? Where they would be sitting on their throne, and the people that were in front of them were nobles, the learned, some priests and representatives of the church, and they would rule through their courts, right? Their courts would have parties and masquerade balls, but they would live a court life. And a courtier is a person that is a part of that court and would advise a king on how to rule his country, okay? So Baldassarre writes a book called The Courtier. It's supposed to serve as a guide on how to act like that person, right? How do you act right? How do you act not like you were in the Middle Ages anymore? How do you act like a Renaissance king advisor? How do you act like a guy that can that is intelligent, well-rounded, very smart, very athletic, can paint things, can play an instrument, and do all these things and prove your worth to a king to show him why you need to be listened to, right? So The Courtier was a book that was supposed to be a guide to behavior during the Renaissance, right? And according to Castiglione, all right, a ideal man during the Renaissance was supposed to be athletic, but not overactive, right? Good at games, but not a gambler, right? So plays a musical instrument, knows history and literature, but is not arrogant about those things, right? So I'm just saying. I think I check a lot of these boxes. All right, so now look. The ideal woman is very sexist by his description, but still is supposed to be graceful, kind, lively, but reserved, beautiful, and offer balance to a man. We don't like his description of women because you can go out there and do whatever you want, all right? But the man one's fine because, you know, it's like describes me really well. And then it also doesn't describe Mr. Watterson or Miss Bethune very well. Now, look, so those things are just to give you a big idea. But this guy is the most important writer of the Renaissance period. This dude is crazy important, and his name is Niccolo Machiavelli, right? So Niccolo Machiavelli is going to write a book known as The Prince, right? And we are going to talk about this text, its implications, and all the crazy stuff that happened around it in class, okay? Because a lot of people struggle with understanding this, and plus we got a chance today to finish up talking about Dante, Petrarch, our Middle Age printing revolution, or our printing revolution, and Baldassarre. It's a lot of big concepts, okay? We are going to talk about Niccolo Machiavelli in class. It's going to be good stuff. I'll see you guys then. Go ahead and jot this down, and then we will talk about him a little bit later, okay? Y'all have a good one.